Hello, so I'm going to do another video on a sword I've bought, and this is a John Barnett rapier. Now, obviously, I'll just say this right at the beginning of the video as a disclaimer. I've heard lots of bad things about John Barnett swords, and I've also seen good reviews of John Barnett swords. And because they're not very expensive, I thought I'd buy one and see what I think myself, because lots of sword forums I find are kind of useless to get information on, because everybody is so opinionated on them that, you know, it's a pointless exercise. So, I think this was 39 inches without checking with a tape measure or looking on online specifications. It is sharp, by the way, as well, because some people said John Barnett swords are blunt. This one's definitely sharp. Now, when I bought it from Southern Swords, you can get have the options of getting sharp swords or blunt swords. The sharp swords cost extra, but this is sharp, so you know, let's get that out of the way. So I'll show you what the actual handguard looks like up close, and the sort of back of the sword with the pommel. So you obviously got like a sword trap kind of there with the guard. That's the side where your knuckles would be, because it's obviously designed for a right-handed user. So the only thing I found that I don't really like the quality of is the scabbard. However, some swords don't even come with scabbard, so a cheap one's better than no scabbard. The only thing that particularly annoys me about this scabbard is that, you might be able to see this, it's left some sort of residue on the blade. I did see that from some reviews, and they said that the more you use the sword putting it in and out of the scabbard, you know, that eventually goes away. So what I'm going to do quickly is just give the blade a wipe down with the cloth I normally use for oiling my swords. And then we'll have a look at the blade. Right, so there we go. So, as I said, I think this is a 39-inch blade, if I remember. It's EN45 spring steel, which in of itself isn't bad or good. I think Hanway and a few other sword brands use EN45 spring steel. The point of spring steel should be basically that the sword bends and then bends back into shape fine. As I'm sure people know this who actually are knowledgeable on blades, with a sword you want a compromise between it bending and snapping back into position and not being too stiff. If it's too bendy, the sword's whippy and it's not very good, and it can bend out of shape easily. If it's too sort of stiff, what will end up happening is the blade can break on a hard impact, or if it starts to bend, it just snaps. So you want a compromise between the two, and as I said, this is definitely sharp. This is almost shaving sharp. So the weight of it feels fine. People I've seen, one of the biggest complaints of John Barnett swords is the weight's too heavy. This is about 1.5 kilos, I think, if it's as much as it's advertised as weighing, but I don't know if they're including the scabbard in the weight of that. And it feels fine. For a really long sword, obviously, you do want a bit of weight to it. You don't want it to be too light. But yeah, for me, this seems to handle absolutely fine. As I've said in other videos, I've been building my forearm muscles up a bit so I can actually wield swords more effectively. Because you do need beefy forearms to actually use swords properly, as well as obviously the right technique. So this will be a sort of one where I will come back to this sword on later videos, and we will see if it's actually holding up well. Apologies for that weird sort of noise every now and again in the corner. It's the fish tank doing it, and I really don't know why, unless it's the fish deciding he's going to shove stuff around in the tank. But yeah, so overall so far, without actually putting it to a physical test, I'm impressed with it. So what I'm going to do now is I've got two boxes in the garden. They're like ones that, I think one's the one the sword came in, one's a sort of thing I had a pole in. Now, if I can actually get them to stand upright properly, I will do some thrusting tests through it, because I'm sure you know, rapiers are primarily designed as thrusting swords. Now, as this is a military style rapier, it means the blade on it is a thicker blade. It's more like a longsword blade. So although it's primarily designed for thrusting, it can actually slash as well. But obviously it's a bit harder to do that, but primarily it's a thrusting blade, and I'm sure the people know who watch my videos or watch lots of other very informative videos on YouTube regarding swords and things like that. With sword blades and sword designs and everything, if you improve it in one area, you generally compromise it in another. So having a very long dedicated thrusting blade means you can't slash with it as effectively or recover from a slash effectively. And if you have something like a you know, curved saber, that means it slashes very effectively. However, it can't thrust very well because, you know, how the impact works on the point and pressure on the point. So I'm expecting this to thrust incredibly well and maybe not slash so well, although it is sharp. So I've not got any milk jugs or anything today. What I am going to do is simply obviously take it out into the garden and try stabbing it through you know, a box or two, and we'll see how well it does that, and then if I can, do a slash on it. So let's do that now. So I'd say the results of that, as you'd expect really. It's hard to slash effectively with this because obviously it's a big rapier intended for thrusting. The edges, as I said, are very sharp on it, so if you actually do get a good swing in, it would certainly cut well. But obviously due to blade profile, it can't actually slash that well. I think I've probably talked about this before, but with blades there's kind of a physics thing to it, where the kind of wider and heavier the blade is, that's what makes it slash better. So if you have obviously, let's say, a big kind of axe head, that obviously slashes better, so that's what you'd expect. Now, this obviously did thrust well enough. Obviously I have no training thrusting it, but when I did thrust it, it went into the cardboard box properly, as you'd expect anyway. But no problems there, no weird blade bending or anything like that. As I said, it's heavy, but it doesn't feel too heavy to me in terms of being able to manoeuvre it around. There's like absolutely no problem with that. Yeah, thrusting seems fairly accurate. Obviously I don't want to kill the camera, but yeah, that seems fine. What I did off camera was I just pressed the blade into the floor a bit to see how it would bend, and it returned back to its position of being, you know, totally straight anyway. So yeah, this feels absolutely fine to me. So far I've got nothing to complain about with it. I knew it was heavy rapier going into it, and obviously I can totally understand the argument of if you're paying more money you would want a lighter weight rapier that's easier to manoeuvre. But if you want a lighter weight rapier, you don't really want to go for the one with the military style blades on. So I'm going to actually be using this as like a training tool as well for my forearms, to actually, you know, build those up to be much stronger, like I've been doing with my other swords. But I think the rapier would be quite useful for that, because I can just do, you know, some waggling of it indoors a bit more, as long as I've got a long straight thing in front of me. But yeah, this John Barnett rapier doesn't seem bad at all actually. Again, like I said, I know obviously if you're buying a much more expensive rapier, then that is going to handle better, yes, but for a sword that costs around £100, I really can't complain too much about it. It is what you get on the tin. It certainly feels solid and it doesn't look like it's going to fall apart at all. But, you know, most of the criticisms I've heard of these, like they're completely blunt. That's definitely not true. I can feel the edge on it. You know, they're too heavy. Again, from what I could tell on weight-wise, this might be about 200 grams heavier than a much more, you know, higher quality expensive rapier. So that's not too bad, I suppose. One's that the blade's made from crap materials. It's EN45 spring steel, so lots of other sword companies use that. That's not a problem in itself at all. So yeah, I can't really think of much to complain about. If I find faults with it, then I'll do an updated video where I mention those faults, but as it seems at the moment, totally fine.